For some people, Christianity is seen as just merely a guaranteed ticket to heaven. Jesus is my get out of hell free card. And that's a wrong view of Christianity. Others see Christianity as something that enhances their lives. It enhances their marriages, their bank accounts, or even their prestige. That's also a wrong view of Christianity. People are often willing to follow Jesus in theory. We say that, right? But we balk when it comes to it threatening our physical comfort, our family priorities, or maybe even our personal timing. If we're honest, many of us, we live out of faith that asks something of us, but never asks everything. We want enough commitment to feel like we're a good Christian, right? Without ever being asked to deny ourselves, to suffer for our faith, or to lose anything we actually care about. We want a comfortable Jesus. We want a safe Jesus. We want a faith that doesn't really call us to surrender our lives, but only asks us for a small commitment, or maybe just a sliver of our time. And that's what Jesus is going to confront in our text today. Is we're going to be in Luke chapter 9, and we're going to read verses 23 through 25. And Jesus is going to confront this idea that we can have a faith that asks something of us, but never everything. He's going to confront the idea that we can have just enough commitment to feel like a good Christian without ever being asked to deny ourselves, to suffer, or to lose anything we care about. And so let's jump into the text today and read these 3 verses. Luke chapter 9, beginning in verse 23. This is the word of the Lord. Then he said to them all, "If anyone wants to follow me after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life because of me will save it. For what does it benefit someone if he gains the whole world and yet loses or forfeits himself?" Now, some of our translations will word that at the end. What does it benefit someone if he gains the whole world and yet loses his soul? And so when it says forfeits himself, that's what the soul is, who we are. And so it's not just something that is within us. We are a soul that happens to inhabit a physical body. And so Jesus is saying, what does it benefit someone if he gains everything the world has to offer but loses his very self? And so today, as we wrap up this series, this is going to be the thing that we're going to walk through and look at, is that the real Jesus calls us to a commitment that costs us everything. The real Jesus calls us to a commitment that costs us everything. And that's one of the things that our culture has done, and our church culture has even fed into, and I've been guilty of this too. We have lessened the demands of Jesus. We have lessened the demands of following him, and we've tried to make it more palatable for the culture. Because let's just be honest, we struggle with, even in the church, for people to be committed. We struggle with that, and so what do? We say, well, maybe we've set the bar too high, so what I need to do is lower the bar a little bit so that maybe more people will follow Jesus. No, I don't need to do that. In fact, you don't need to do that. We need to keep the bar exactly where Jesus left it and say this is the requirement, because Jesus, what did he do when crowds started following him? Remember, and if you've read through the Gospel of John 6, he feeds all these people and he's got these thousands of people that are following him, and then he begins to say some weird things, right? Unless you eat of my body and you drink of my blood, you cannot be my disciples. And so we see that Jesus was not interested in a crowd, but Jesus was interested in people who would follow him and surrender everything to him. And so we got to not lessen and lower the bar. And in fact, the more we do that, the more we water down what true biblical Christianity looks like. And so what we've done is we've given our culture, and we've given even the church, this idea that just show up for an hour or two on Sunday and get your Jesus fix and study and listen to the message and say, man, that was a great sermon, and then I'm good until next Sunday. That's what our culture views Christianity as. They think like you go to church on Sunday, and again, that's wrong anyway. We don't go to church. We are the church. We go to a building to gather as the church, but we're not going to church. And so we've given this culture this false idea of what it really looks like to follow Jesus. And we need to recapture, and we need to call people to that. I'll be honest, it's a danger we have even in everything within our faith. We have the danger of lowering the bar and saying like, hey, and I'm not trying to be mean when I say this, it's like, hey, just serve once every 30 days because we struggle to get people to commit to serve. So we think if we just ask them to do it once a month, then maybe they'll do it. And I'm just being real with you. Like, we shouldn't have to struggle to get people to serve. If we really, really love Jesus and we're set on surrendering everything to Him, we shouldn't have to pull teeth to get people to serve. We shouldn't have to pull teeth to get people to give financially. We shouldn't have to pull teeth to get people to be faithful to the gathering of the church. But yet we do. Why? Because we really lack commitment. And we look at what Jesus is saying, and when we start preaching that, we say, whoa, that sounds kind of extreme. Let's get a little more reasonable here. Like, that might be good for you because you're a pastor, or that might be good for you because you're an elder, or you're really serious about your walk with Jesus. And Jesus does not differentiate between ministry leaders, those who are serious in their walk with Jesus, and then just the people who want to like be nominal Christians. There is no such distinction. And Jesus says this is the requirement. And so let's jump into the text today. Let's work our way through these 3 verses in the time we have together, and let's talk about the real Jesus calls His followers to radical commitment. Number 1, if you're following along in your sermon notes, this is the first fill in the blank. Number 1, radical commitment requires us to deny ourselves. Look at what Jesus says. He says, if anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself. And notice before he gets to the deny part, he says anyone. If anyone, this invitation is open to absolutely anyone, for whosoever will. Jesus is not saying, well, only certain people. Only the ones that look this way, only the ones that vote this way, only the ones that have this kind of status in culture or society. He says, if anyone, the invitation is given. So it doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter what you've had happen in your life. It doesn't matter what kind of sin you've been involved in up to this point. Jesus says the invitation is for you, and it's for me. It's for all of us. If anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself. So when Jesus says deny himself, he's talking about more than just us resisting temptation or staying away from sin. I have a feeling that that's kind of how we read that. And we read it when we say deny himself. And we think about like denying ourselves from worldly pleasures and lusts, right? Or sins. And Jesus, yeah, that's part of it, but it goes deeper than that. Most every one of us in this room, if we've been following Jesus, we know that we need to say no to and deny the sinful desires of our flesh. And I would even venture to say a lot of people who don't follow Jesus understand that there's certain things in their lives that they don't need to do. It's just wired within us. Most of us know that. And so when he says deny ourselves, it's going deeper than that. That word deny here, and as I was studying this, man, this really like landed this home for me. That word that is translated deny is a very strong word. It's not an ordinary word for no. It's in an intensified form that means to utterly disown, to refuse to acknowledge any connection at all. It's the language of severed relationship, not polite refusal. It's not saying no thank you. It's literally like if you say you're dead to me. I'm cutting you off, right? We use words like that in our culture all the time. We say I'm severing this relationship. It's over. I'm ending it. This is where it gets interesting. This very same word that Luke uses here, deny, he later uses when Peter stands outside at the fire and denies Jesus 3 times. He severs the relationship outright. He treats Jesus like a stranger he's never met. That's the force of the word deny that Luke's using. He's saying Jesus is saying to us in this text, he's calling us to treat self, treat our desires, to treat lust, sin, all these things, the same way Peter treated him when he denied him. I don't know the man. And Jesus is saying when we deny ourselves, we literally need to say, like, I sever the relationship. It is dead. I don't know anything about that. I'm not going to acknowledge that there's any connection at all to this. And so denying ourselves, it goes deeper than avoiding sin. And in fact, I think that's the way too often in the church we read that like it's an avoidance of sin. And we think, well, I'm avoiding the big sin, right? I'm avoiding all those things that I need to. I'm not killing anybody. I'm not sleeping with somebody else's spouse. I'm not taking God's name in vain. I'm not stealing. I'm doing good here. I'm honoring my parents. But it goes deeper than that. Denying ourselves means surrendering the right to run our own life, even the parts of it that look good, feel good, and aren't even wrong in themselves. We all would agree, right, that we're supposed to deny the sinful desires of the flesh, right? I don't think we have any debate over that. We would all say, like, I need to deny the sinful desires of my flesh when it comes to lust or anger or greed or pride. But you know what? It's so much harder for us to say no to something good, something we worked for, something nobody would fault us for wanting, right? And saying those same severing words to it. Could be something good. Like I said, it could be something that God doesn't say is harmful, God doesn't say is wrong, but maybe God's calling us to deny ourselves in that way. Sometimes the hardest thing that Christ asks you and I to deny isn't a sinful desire. It's the good one that has subtly become more important to us than He is. And I think about that in my own life. How many times have I allowed good things that God has given me, good things that God has blessed me with, and I've allowed them to be elevated to the place that they're competing with my affection for Jesus. And so when He's saying, deny ourselves, He's saying sometimes following Him is going to require us to say no to things that are good because He has something better. Saying no to something that's not wrong, and nobody would fault us for wanting, but He's saying, that's not what I want you to pursue, because that is not what is going to make you look more like me. And so here's a question for us. Is there something good in our lives right now that we have allowed to take priority in our lives over our commitment to following Jesus? Is there something good in our lives right now that you and I have allowed to take place of Jesus, that we've allowed to ascend to the throne of our hearts, and that we're not denying ourselves? Again, we all, like I said, would look at this and go, yes, we need to deny worldly pleasures. We need to deny sinful thoughts and actions and the lusts the lust that we have in our heart. We need to deny those things. We'd all agree with that. But what about the good things? What about the things that are not sinful, not evil, but yet we're subtly allowing them to become things that take the place of Jesus in our hearts? I think about in my own life before we move on to the next thing. I'll just share this with you guys. That for myself, I'll tell you what it was for me for a long time. And for a long time, I remember, so I was pastoring a small Southern Baptist church in Patrick County, and at the end of that time, I knew God was moving me on, and that's actually how I ended up coming to Hope in 2014, and we tried to plant back then what was called Blessed Hope in Stewart, and that didn't pan out, and it failed, and I can tell you, if anyone ever wants to plant a church, I can tell you everything not to do. I know exactly what not to do. But anyway, that happened. So then I go through a church planting assessment. And this assessment reveals that I lean definitely more towards administrative things and more in the role of an executive pastor. And at that moment, I felt like I got kind of typecasted. And so I got typecasted into this administrative role. And I enjoyed doing stuff like that, but it didn't allow me to do other things I was passionate about. And so I'll never forget, years later, I ended up taking a 2-year sabbatical from ministry because I was burned out. I was in an unhealthy place, and I kept wondering, God, are you ever going to open the door for me to be a lead pastor again? And it was all about that. And I finally got to the place I was like, okay, God, if you don't open this door, I'm okay. And then after my 2-year break, I get a call from Brian, and he brings me on staff at Hope Danville, and it's in a kind of an associate pastoral role, and again, doing everything. Like, I'm doing a lot of things that I am passionate about, but there's things that I'm passionate about I'm not getting to do, and I'm just like, I'm not satisfied. I feel like there's just something off, and I still have this pursuit in my mind that I've got to be a lead pastor, and I hung on to this for a long time. And then I let the SBC talk me into something I never should have let them talk me into. I have a heart for revitalization and replanting. And in Hope Church, we do a lot of that. And it's needed. But I let them talk me into taking a church in Halifax County that needed revitalization that probably ran 10 people. And they'd had another church that successfully was revitalized. And they told me, we think you could do this. Okay. I go. I'm there 2 weeks, and I'm like, nope. I messed up. I knew it. I messed up. And so it's kind of funny because during this time period, I'm still sort of connected to Hope Church. In fact, I still have my office at Hope Danville, and I'm still being paid part-time to do some things in Hope Danville. And I remember coming back, and Brian and I having this conversation, and so I resigned. I was there 5 weeks, and I came back, and this is at the end of 2020. And there's a handful of you in this room that'll understand where I'm going with this in a moment. But I remember that, and I came back, and I sat down, and I had this conversation with God and a few other close people, and I was like, you know what? I think I'm done. The lead pastor thing, that season has passed. God had that in my life for a season, and that season is over. And so I let it go. And then in God's sovereignty and His providence, the end of 2020, there's a handful of people in this room that were around here at that point, and some things happen. The beginning of 2021 happens, and I get a phone, Brian asked me, hey, can you go to Martinsville? I need you to preach for 2 weeks. Yep, I'll go. I'll preach for 2 weeks, sure. Show up, preach. After the second week, a gentleman calls Brian and says, hey, we want him to keep coming and just filling in until we find someone. And he said, you okay with that? Yeah, I'm good with that. Sure. I got no problem with that. Hey, that's great. I get to go preach somewhere on Sundays, and then I can do the stuff in Danville. At that point, I was over small groups and discipleship, which I love doing. I'm like, this is awesome. And so I did that for months and months. And I remember some of the guys even asking, so when are you going to take Martinsville? I'm not. Season's done. I'm over it. God's moved that out of my life. And you know what I came to realize, and I'm going to say this and we're going to move on, is that I believe that in my heart I had elevated something that was good to a place that competed with my relationship with Jesus. And it was when I surrendered that and said, I'm done, that God said, okay, now you're ready. 5 years later, after preaching for 2 weeks, I'm still here. And so it's like, but it's funny how God uses that. And so I say that because I believe there are things in our lives so often that we elevate to the place it's good. And there's nothing wrong with it. But Jesus says we got to be willing to deny ourselves to follow Him. So let's look at the second thing. Number 2, radical commitment requires us to take up our cross daily and follow Jesus. Radical commitment requires us to take up our cross daily and follow Jesus. Look at verse 23 again. He says that if anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself. And then he says, take up his cross daily and follow me. So when Jesus tells the disciples to take up their cross daily, it's not a metaphor or some symbolism for a minor inconvenience. That's how we treat taking up our cross. The modern church, we say, well, that's just my cross to bear. Maybe it's a difficult person we have to deal with, and we say, well, that's just my cross to bear. Or maybe it could be a difficult circumstance in our life. That's just my cross I have to bear. Maybe it's a physical infirmity. That's my cross I have to bear. That's not what Jesus means when he says, take up your cross daily, okay? Those are things that could be trials. Those are things that God could be using to sanctify us, to make us more like Jesus, but it's not taking up our cross. See, you and I, in our culture, what we have done, we've turned the cross into jewelry. We hang the cross on our walls at home. Some of us have tattoos of crosses on our bodies. We use them as decoration, right? It's become a symbol of comfort and a symbol of faith, of the Christian faith. But that was not what the cross meant to the first century Jew. And again, this is where it's important for us to know the Bible was not written to us. This was written for us. But it was not written to us. And that's a problem. When we view that this was written to me and to you, it leads us to places that we misinterpret Scripture. And in the first century, a cross meant exactly one thing. Cross, we sang about, it meant the most brutal, humiliating, public execution that could be carried out by Rome. It was reserved for slaves, rebels, and the worst kind of criminals. It was not for respectable people. And so Jesus, when he says, take up your cross daily, Jesus is describing a death sentence that you and I carry out in public for everyone to see. Because that's exactly what he did. He died a public death, a horrific death, a humiliating death, a brutal death, and he did it for everyone to see. And so he's describing a death sentence. When he says, take up your cross, it is a call to die. And so Jesus is literally calling us to die. Die to ourselves. And he could be calling us to die physically as well. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But he says that taking up our cross is something we must do daily. And so let me say this. It's not a single dramatic moment of sacrifice. So a lot of us, we say, well, when I came to faith in Jesus, I died to myself like it was a one-time event. No, it is a daily thing. Paul says, I die daily. It's not something we do once and we move past. And we got to quit treating the Christian faith as this moment where someone says a prayer, walks an aisle, raises a hand, and we say, you have passed from death to life because of this one thing. You're good to go. Go have at it. And yes, salvation is instantaneous when we come to faith in Jesus. And salvation is eternal once we experience new life in Christ. But it is the starting point. And our church culture has treated salvation as if it is the end goal. Our end goal is not just to see people saved. And that may sound weird. If you grew up in church, you may think, why in the world is the pastor saying our goal is not to see people get saved? That's part of our goal. That's not the whole entirety of it. Our goal as followers of Jesus is to make disciples who make disciples. And so salvation is part of it, but salvation is the starting point, meaning that we lead people to faith in Jesus, but we don't leave them there. We continue to walk with them and disciple them and teach them. And so when Jesus is talking about dying daily, it's a posture that you and I return to every single day for the rest of our lives. Meaning that we come back and we approach him each day having to die to ourselves. And so following Jesus was never meant to be this one-time decision that costs you and I one time. It is a daily death. It's a daily death to our pride, our comfort, our right to ourselves, repeated again tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. And this is something we need to understand as the church. We need to practice dying daily. And I think this is a big deal. Why? Because our culture right now, we live in a culture that gets offended by everything. And that's a problem because it's crept into the church, and now the church gets offended by everything. And here's what I know. If you and I would practice dying daily, we would practice taking up our cross and dying to self, we can't get offended. Dead people can't get offended. If I'm dead, it means I can't be offended. And we've got to model what that looks like. Because we talked about this at camp this past week. What the culture is offended by today will change tomorrow. And then the next day, it's something new. All of a sudden, well, now this is offensive. I'm learning this all the time. I've said stuff in front of my kids. They're like, you can't say that. I'm like, yeah, I can. You can't say that. I can say it. Like, I can say it because I'm not offended by it, okay? And like, let's just be honest. There's some things that we need to quit saying, okay, well, this is what I'm going to be offended by. And a lot of times we choose to be offended. And I'm not trying to be mean, but if we're going to die to ourselves and we're going to die daily and we're going to pick up that cross, we've got to die to some things. If we would die daily, it'd take care of all the drama and the crap that happens in the church world too. I remember first church I pastored, that was their reputation. Somebody told my mom when they found out I was putting my resume into the church, I don't know if he wants that church, all they do is fight. That's probably true. They did a lot of that. But you know why? It's because we're not dying to ourselves. If you and I are dying to ourselves daily and we're daily crucifying our flesh, we shouldn't have enmity with people in the body. The reason why we do is because we're not dying to ourselves. And Jesus says that's part of following him is picking up your cross daily, is bearing your cross. And so it is death, but it's going to go deeper than that too. One commentator put it this way. He says, no one who commits to following Christ and does so lives a life of ease. No one. If your Christianity has not brought discomfort to your life, something's wrong. A committed heart knows the discomfort of loving difficult people, the discomfort of giving until it hurts, the discomfort of putting oneself out for the ministry of Christ and his church, the discomfort of a life out of step with modern culture, the discomfort of being disliked. And so if our Christianity, our version of following Jesus has not cost us something, not even our convenience, our preferences, our schedule, something is seriously wrong. Because Jesus is saying it's going to cost you. But notice he does not say, take up your inconvenience daily. He said a cross. And a cross was never about discomfort. Even though this commentator talks about that it should bring discomfort, it goes beyond that. Cross was about death. But a cross was also not only about death, but the cross was also about suffering. And we need to park here for just a moment because this is another area that the American church has a unique problem about. As American Christians, we have this unique problem when it comes to suffering. We have come to believe that you and I have come to believe that we are exempt from it. And this is so detrimental to our walk with Jesus. We watch reports of believers in other parts of the world who lose their homes, lose their freedoms, their families, and even their lives for following Jesus. And what do? We feel sympathy. We pray for them. And probably more than likely what we do is we thank God that we don't live there. Let's just get real. And we should thank God that we don't have to deal with that. But there's also a problem in that. We do have this unique problem when it comes to suffering. Can I ask you a question, church? Why do we believe that God would allow all of his followers worldwide, all down throughout history, to suffer and somehow America is going to get exempt from it? Why do we think we're so special that somehow we should be exempt from suffering? It's because we've been blessed to live in a country where we have rights and we have freedoms. And yet somehow we try to transpose those into our Christianity and say, well, we have freedoms, we have rights, and so we shouldn't have to suffer. Scripture doesn't say that. In fact, Jesus says, take up your cross. It's a call to die. It's a call to suffer. And we do need to thank God for that. But what happens is this unique problem we have, it makes us, when we view these people who do suffer, their suffering feels like a different category or level of Christianity than ours. How many times have we read a story of a martyr? We've heard something on the news and we think, man, I don't know if I could do that or not, right? Because it feels like, man, they're so much stronger in their faith that they could do that. But do we realize that it's actually the level of commitment that Christ calls us to, even here in America, as that you and I should be willing to die for Christ? But the sad reality of that is, I don't know how we could really say that we're willing to die with Christ, for Christ, when most of us don't really live for Him. I'm guilty of that too, and that's why I say most of us. I'm putting myself in that. Too often I live for me. And I can say that all I want, like say, man, I would die for Jesus. And I may say that here, but the reality of it is, we do everything we can to protect ourselves from having to live in that reality. See, our freedoms are real blessings. And we do need to thank God for that. We don't need to take that for granted. But somewhere along the way, the American church, we have started treating those freedoms as a promise. We treat comfort and safety we enjoy as Americans as something that Jesus owes us, rather than something our culture just happens to afford us for now. Jesus does not owe us what we've been promised in our Constitution. We need to understand that. We have been blessed that we have that, okay? But following Jesus is never promised, okay, you're going to have freedom of speech. You're going to have freedom to assemble and to worship how you see fit. Because church, there may come a day, and I say may, we may live to see it, we may not, I don't know. But I believe that we need to be prepared for the day when they're going to say, you can't preach the Bible. You guys can't gather on Sunday and worship. What are we going to do then? I can tell you what my plan is. My plan is we're just going to follow Jesus. Like, that's my plan, and I'm praying that God will give me the strength to do that when I have to make that decision. But somehow along the way, we've got to stop treating comfort and safety as something that Jesus owes us. Jesus does not owe us that. If we have it, we are blessed, because you know what? The rest of the world that follows Jesus, they don't have that. We shared this a few weeks ago in a Muslim country. If you were to come to faith in Jesus in Iraq or Iran or Pakistan or Afghanistan, it is most certainly a death sentence on your head, and not only on you, but on your family if you don't recant your faith. We don't understand that kind of commitment. But that's what Jesus is actually calling us to. And so what ends up happening is that when following Jesus actually costs us something, our first instinct in our culture is what? To ask, why is this happening to me? As if suffering for our faith is not the norm. And so when something happens, we go, God, why are you letting this happen? Well, that's the norm for everybody else. And yet we look at it like it's something strange has happened. When Scripture tells us we're not to view trials and tribulations that way. And so we view suffering for our faith as if it's not normal, rather than the very thing Jesus told us to expect. And so taking up your cross daily, it means being willing to move past discomfort into actual suffering for the sake of following Jesus. Now, my prayer is that you and I don't ever have to live to experience that. But we have to be ready to experience that, because that's what Jesus tells us following Him is going to produce. The same suffering Christians around the world have carried for 2,000 years. Is the kind of suffering that Jesus is calling us to. It's not a different, lesser version of it because of where we happen to live. It's not just saying, well, me taking up my cross is going to be, I just got to deal with that person that's difficult. I mean, that might be something God's going to use to sanctify us. It could be a trial that or testing that we're going to go through. But I don't think that that's picking up our cross daily and following Jesus. We say, well, it's just this tough situation I'm facing right now. Let me ask you a question. If we were to stand next to a believer who has lost everything for following Jesus. They've lost their home, they've lost their way of life, their job, the way to provide. And what if they've even lost their family, their spouse, and their children? They've lost everything. If we stood next to a believer who's lost everything for following Jesus, would our version of following Jesus look the same, or would it look different? I hate to say this, but I think our version of following Jesus wouldn't look anything like theirs. And sadly, our version of following Jesus really doesn't look anything like this a lot of times. And so Jesus calls us to radical commitment. Let's look at the third thing as we move on. I got to hurry. Number 3, radical commitment requires us to stop chasing the wrong kind of life. Look at verses 24 and 25. Jesus says, "For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life because of me will save it. For what does it benefit someone if he gains the whole world and yet loses or forfeits himself?" I want to say this. Every single one of us in this room this morning, we are chasing some version of what we believe is the life that we are supposed to be living. Whatever that is. Every one of us is chasing some version of life that we think we're supposed to live. And Jesus says whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for his sake will save it. And so Jesus is naming 2 completely different ways of pursuing life and tells us that only one of them actually leads to the life we're after. And so often we pursue all the things that we think is going to give us the life we desire, and he's saying that's actually going to lead you to what you don't want. And what makes this whole thing so dangerous is that chasing the wrong kind of life rarely feels like the wrong kind of life when we're chasing it. While we're chasing it, it feels like that's what we're supposed to be doing. It's what gives us satisfaction. It's what gives us contentment. It can feel like ambition. It can feel like responsibility. It can feel like we're finally getting somewhere, right? And this is the danger. Even genuine followers of Jesus, we can get caught up in chasing the wrong kind of life. This happens when you and I allow our identity to be built around a career, as I shared earlier, a bank account, a reputation, or even a level of comfort and security that quietly and subtly starts defining and controlling our lives. And when this happens, when we do this, what we do is we settle for a lesser version of the life than what Christ desires for you and I to experience. Because Jesus says, I came to give them life that they would have it more abundantly. And it doesn't mean that Jesus wants to come and give us wealth and riches and he wants to give us like the most comfortable life. But when he talks about abundantly, it means that we experience life the way it should have been experienced before the fall happened in the garden. The way life was intended. And so I want you to understand this as we get ready to close out. Closeness with Jesus isn't something that just happens because we believe in him. It's something that we either have or we don't based on what we were pursuing. And so if we're pursuing the wrong kind of life, we are not going to have closeness with Jesus. Nick shared this with the students this week that so often, and I think this is true for adults too, that why does God feel distant to us? Because we are pursuing the wrong kind of life and we don't have closeness with him because we're pursuing something that is contrary to him. And so these verses also we see speak to not only the follower of Jesus, but they're also about authentic salvation. Jesus is speaking to those who spend their entire lives pursuing everything the world has to offer while they neglect their very soul. Everything that we gain in this pursuit is temporary. None of it survives death. None of it can be carried with us into eternity. Everything that we're living for in this world will be gone one day. Our houses, our cars, our careers, our bank accounts, everything. The only thing that we take from this life into the next is our soul. And so what you and I are pursuing right now is not neutral. We are either pursuing who Jesus is and what Jesus calls us to, or we're pursuing life for us. And Jesus says we cannot do both. And so what we're pursuing right now, I want to ask a question. Does it say we belong to Jesus? Or what we're pursuing right now, does it say we've been chasing something else and calling it faith in Christianity? So as we wrap up today, there's many of us in this room, we would say that we are committed to Jesus. We would verbally and intellectually affirm that. We've never missed a Sunday. We serve faithfully. We know our Bible. But if we're honest, our commitment has cost us almost nothing. We've denied the sins everyone has already agreed there are sins that we did deny, while subtly protecting the good things that we have never been willing to give up. Can I ask you a question? If Jesus were to stand here today and look at us and say, I want you to quit your job, would we do it? Would we really? If he says, I want you to give away every dime that's in your bank account, would we really be willing to do that? See, we'd probably be willing to say, well, I'm willing to forsake the sin, but what about the good stuff? He says, hey, you know what? Sell your car. Maybe you need to do that. What if he says, maybe you need to downsize your life because you are focusing on the wrong things? Would we be willing to do that for real? These are legit questions we have to wrestle with. And we've settled in American Christianity for this version of following Jesus that's quiet, comfortable, and costless. It feels like we're following Jesus, but we're not coming close to the kind of commitment that he's actually calling for in his word. And so I want to call us to respond today in three really different ways. And we're going to stand in just a moment and we're going to sing. But if you're here today and you're a follower of Jesus, I want you to look honestly at what you have been pursuing. What does that reveal about your relationship with Jesus? And not just surface level, but honestly say, we've prayed this, God, search me. Know my heart, know my thoughts. We need to ask God to search us and humbly allow him to search us this morning. Think about the good things in our life right now. It could be our job, it could be our house, it could be our bank account, it could be our relationships, whatever it is. But have any of them subtly become more important to us than our commitment to Jesus? And we need to be honest with ourselves. Has following Jesus actually cost us anything in our life? And if it hasn't, then Jesus is calling us to repent, and he's calling us to change course and to follow after him. And so let's stand and we're going to sing. But I want to challenge you today to honestly examine your heart and ask God to search it, to reveal to you what you have been pursuing. Because I'll be honest, as I've done inventory in my own heart and I've allowed God to search me, if I'm just being real with you guys, like lately, I feel like I've been more focused on living for me, pursuing what I want and not what God wants. And not denying myself, not taking up my cross daily and following after Jesus. And so I want us to search and just really get real with God and ask him to search our hearts. We're going to sing. I want to invite you, as you're praying and you ask God to search your heart, I want to invite you, if you'd be willing, if God is speaking to your heart today and he's showing you something, that we come in this place we call an altar. It's not really a real altar, but that's what we call it. But it's a place of response, because an altar is a place of sacrifice. As we said, an altar is a place of death. And an altar is a place where we bring things to God. We crucify them. We sacrifice them. And we offer them to God. And it's a place for us to respond. There's nothing magical about this place, but I believe there's something special, and I think there's something that God uses in us when we step out and we humble ourselves. And it's not so someone goes, oh, well, they went forward. They must really have something going on in their life. No, it's that I'm willing to say, you know what, God, I don't care what anybody else is doing. I don't care what anyone else thinks. I just want to come down. I want to kneel in front of you. And I want to put to death anything in my life that needs to die. I want to sacrifice anything on this altar that needs to be sacrificed. I want to call us to respond in that way today as we sing and as we respond.